Thanks a lot, guys, for coming out tonight. Great turnout, so I think there's a lot of interest in this topic. Like I said, I didn't want to say too much about them and their backgrounds and their companies. I think everyone would love to hear it in your words. So, in either order that you like, give us a brief history of, I don't know, first real job until, bring us till now. How are you in the roles that you're in right now in sales?
I think you said you were first.
Okay.
Oh, I did put that.
So my first real job was in Vancouver. I worked for a company called Class Software, and I worked on the consulting and support team. So that was my first tech job. And I worked at Class for a few years, and I was asked to move over to the sales team. And I thought, oh, no, I'll never be good at sales. I was kind of afraid of it, didn't really understand what sales meant, and then eventually I did move over, and it just fit me like a glove. So I built my career as an individual contributor, and then I moved into sales leadership and just continued to expand my role, left Class, which became the Active Network, and moved to Unbounce, which was a company who didn't have a sales team. It was all self-serve, so I came on there 4 years ago to build that sales team from scratch, which was a pretty unique opportunity to build a sales team in an existing company, about 140 people at the time, and to build a sales organization there.
Great, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to go back a little further in time. My very first job was, I was a paper boy, and it was in the hilliest neighborhood in my hometown. I had every single driveway either went straight up or straight down, and I think I got paid 10 cents a paper to deliver papers at the time, so that gives you a sense of how old I am. And after that, my first real sales job was something I got while I was in business school at UBC, and it was part of like the entrepreneurship program, and they placed you with a company that was looking to get their product into market, and I sold this product called Squick. And who's here has heard of Rain-X? Okay, Rain-X is this thing you put on your windshield to make it so that your windshield doesn't streak, and it's a liquid product, and it's, I guess, pretty good for what it does. Squick was not that. So I met the founders. They were like total nerd out engineers who had built this little robot to put the Squick into the little packets, and it was a powder-based product that you had to emulsify onto the windshield, and I had to go around from gas station to gas station selling this shit. And I'll tell you, after that, I swear to God, I am never going into sales. I am never going into sales, and here I am. I don't know what happened. So that was my very first sales gig. I got into tech pretty early. I fell in love with tech, like right out of university. I jumped into tech, and I'll tell you, I think you wanted to know our first selling experiences or something like that too, right?
Yeah, so go through a couple of milestones,
Yeah,
and
okay.
I'm going to go back to you, because there's more I want to hear from you.
So my very first tech job, I worked at this computer company that we sold to like Department of Fisheries and Oceans and UBC and all that kind of stuff. And I sold tech, like everything. And I can still remember selling internet in a box. Like actually the product was called Internet in a Box. And that was like really, really early, and now of course the internet's everywhere and it's pretty easy to get access to. But my highlight of that job was I sold a laptop to Robin Williams when I was like 21 years old. It was like the funniest. He was in town filming Jumanji, the first one for anybody that was born after the first one. That was a very long time ago. And so he was in town filming Jumanji and he wanted a laptop. So I sold this guy a laptop. It was like the funniest thing I've ever done in my life. It was super cool. And then from there, I just kept going into tech. I realized that you kind of need to follow your passion. I think you were asking a question about learnings and stuff along the way. So I got into a company called Matrox by passion. And while I was at this other company, I was in multimedia school. I was learning film, animation, and design, and imaging, and all that kind of stuff. So I knew like all the coolest tech that I wanted to build for my own multimedia system, like so I could make movies and all that kind of stuff. And when I was talking to a customer that came into our retail store, there was this show called Comdex, which I think it doesn't exist anymore now, but Comdex was in Vancouver, and this company out of Montreal was in town, and they were checking out their product in our store, and I was actually selling that product to the customer that was in there at the time, and it was a graphics board, and it was this big board that you plunked into a computer, and it made your screen do all kinds of crazy things. And I sold it so incredibly well that the VP of sales, who happened to be in the store at the time, goes, I have never heard anybody sell our product with so much passion and enthusiasm and with such a great understanding of it. How'd you like to move to Montreal? I'm like, okay. And so I moved to Montreal, and that kind of shot my tech career forward. I was selling hardware at the time, and then I moved back to Vancouver when my niece was born, who she's now, I'm going to say this as I should be embarrassed by this. She's a dental hygienist now in dental hygienist school, and she just finished my 8th tooth cleaning in the last like 10 weeks. It's hell. Now, so if anybody ever wants to volunteer for dental hygienist, to be the subject, don't. But yeah, so she's 21 years old now, and I moved back when she was born because I didn't want to be the uncle who sent checks in the mail. So started my own startup out here. We sold that to a company called Bell Micro Products, which was traded on NASDAQ at the time. And then I got into software. My first job in software was actually selling antivirus software, which I hated. And it's a very successful company. It's in Vancouver. It's called Sophos. It wasn't for me. And then I got into Vision Critical. I ran different geographies in Vision Critical. I ran North America. I looked after our sports and media and entertainment business there, and our tech and telecom business. Then I moved to Australia, and I did 2.5 years there. And then I moved to London, where my daughter was born. That was my 3rd child, and we decided we didn't want to be in London with 3 kids and line up for, to put our kids on a swing set. So we moved back to Vancouver, and then I got into the startup world. So about 1.5 years after coming back to Vancouver, I started the musings of Dooley. That's sort of my story.
Good stuff. And Jane, you've been in sales for at least 15 years, but I feel like you didn't explain that.
Yeah, I feel like I need to share my first job now. So I was a figure skater, and I actually played figure skating solo music as my first job. So I would be like, solo music for Jane Osborne. Obviously, I wouldn't call it for myself, but for everybody else. And that was my first job. So I went into Parks and Recreation, and I thought that would be fun, and I worked there. And then when I worked at Class, that was a tech company for Parks and Recreation. So I thought that was a really great opportunity to take something that I loved and get into tech, because that was really where things were at. So I moved across the country. I moved from Ottawa out here and started working for Class. As I said, I was in consulting and support, and basically in my role, I was, as a project manager, I was upselling software and services to customers that I believed that they needed, and they were buying them, and the president didn't want to give the salespeople basically the free money, right? Because I'd sell it and they'd do the quote and send it. So he tried to convince me to go into sales, and I said, no, I'll never be good at that. Well, as I mentioned, I moved into sales, and I realized that sales was about relationship building and connecting with people. I'm also very competitive, so there was also that competitive factor, but I realized that that's really what sales was about. It's about the relationship that you're creating. And I just fell in love with it and continued. So that was one of my well, actually that's 2, getting into tech and recreation and moving into sales. And and then just realizing how much I like to build. So some people are creative through painting or drawing. Yeah, I draw stick people. But I could stick people. I realized that how I'm creative is by building teams and maximizing the talent that I have on my teams, and I'm really passionate about doing that.
Solid. And just quickly, did you guys study business? Does that matter? Just quickly.
What's that?
Business. Did you study business, or what did you go to school?
I have a degree in social science. I did take business. I took a minor in business.
So you asked a couple of questions there. 1, did I study business? And 2, did I go to school? I have a business degree. I don't know that I studied, and I'm not sure I went to school, but somehow I ended up with a business degree from UBC, which is now the School of Solder.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So again, rewind to that first sales job till now. How has sales changed or evolved over last 10, 15 years, or maybe much longer for Kris?
Hey, we don't need to play that one on there. It's changed a lot.
We have to give you extra time so you can talk about everything.
Yeah. Let me just pull out my index. So it's changed a lot. There's obviously everything's moved from on-prem to in the cloud. That's one big change. I think the buyer process has completely changed, and who you sell to has completely changed, which I think is a really big part of this story. So we've seen this kind of evolve. I want to take some notes on this one because I want to make sure I got these ones out. So we've gone from like on-prem to the cloud. We've gone from mono solution to a stack. So you don't just put something into the CRM anymore. You have a stack of tools that you need to use now. We've gone from landline to Zoom. Right? And I think that the whole notion of having to be in field and in front of your customers has completely changed because we have video now, and so you can really change the dynamic of how you interact with people. We've gone from silos, like products, all your information lives in silos, to a shitload of silos. And I think that's actually a really big problem that still needs to be solved. We've gone from one spammy intro email to say, hey, I'm looking to sell to you, I'm wondering if you're interested in buying, to like a sequence of spammy emails now, which I think is another problem that we need to solve. And I truly believe that, like, as a founder, as somebody who gets a lot of these emails, I can tell you it is really, really challenging to find that balance. I tell my salespeople to do the exact same thing, so I understand why we do it, but we need to find a different way of doing that. We've gone from gut feel to data-driven, and we've gone from individual to team selling. I mentioned the buyer journey, and I think this is really important as well. So the buyer journey has really, really changed in how you sell to that buyer. So we used to sell to the CIO, and we no longer sell to the CIO. And then it evolved. We sold to the executive, and that was like the division head or whatever. So selling to Jane or selling to the head of marketing or whoever. And now we're actually seeing it evolve to this world of user empowerment. And that movement is really happened because of this. This device has really changed the way that people want to consume technology. And we have these expectations that enterprise software is going to look and feel like a consumer-based solution. And frankly, a lot of times they don't. So the user has a much bigger say in the whole buying journey than they ever did. And that's where we really sit, and other companies in Vancouver sit, you guys as well, around this whole idea of product-led growth. So that's a big change as well. I think that sales process has changed a bit too. But I think that the underlying story of how you sell has stayed fairly consistent. Like, you can change the acronyms from MEDIC to BANT to MEDPIC to whatever. You're still looking for certain signals inside of a deal. So I don't think that has changed radically. And you can call it Miller-Heiman strategic selling or challenger or anything you want. And again, the underlying message is going to be roughly the same.
Yeah, I think, and just to continue on with what you were saying, Kris, about the buyer journey, we have less control now over the buyer journey. It used to be you'd call in, there was no internet or no resources for people to be able to research and look at competitors and look at what people were doing. Now, sales reps get calls at any time during the journey. It could be someone who hasn't done any research. It could be someone who's 90% down the pipeline. And so salespeople need to be ready to talk to and meet that potential customer wherever they are in their customer journey. So there's got to be a lot more flexibility. There's got to be a lot more savvy, I think, on the salesperson's part, because the buyer's more educated. Now they're looking at the competitors, and I think there's more competitors in the field. We keep seeing these maps, and every year it's like there's 1,000 new different types of software that you can buy. And so really being able to differentiate what you're selling and what your company has and the value that your company offers is even more challenging.
Great. So something I think that actually I missed was, so we just talked about the evolution of sales. So the next thing I was going to ask is, so what does sales look like in your companies? But also, I don't think we got too deep into what your companies do from your point of view, right?
So Unbounce is a digital marketing software company. We do landing pages primarily to help customers increase their conversions. And we are primarily an inbound sales company, which I think is Also, another change is everything used to live in sales, all the outbound sales, and we see a lot more gray area where sales and marketing are working a lot more closely together now. Sometimes business development can sit on the marketing team these days. So we are primarily inbound. We have a trial methodology, so customers can come in and they get a 14-day trial to try the software, and we have people who are calling from there. So we've got what we call our onboarding team. We also have an account executive team that's dealing with the larger customers. And then we also have a launch team, because we know it is critical that for SaaS, in the SaaS business, for customers to stay, is they need to adopt your product and they need to see success. If they don't see that, they can leave at any time. And they can go and work with someone else who's going to show them the way. So it's really critical for businesses to make sure that they are getting their customers to activate the features where they're going to see success.
Great, thanks.
We sell freedom, and we sell it to salespeople. So the whole tech stack has gotten really overwhelming for everybody in every part of business. As you said, like the map is absurd. Like they almost need to reset the map at this point in time and go back to nothing. But what I mean by that is every salesperson spends an inordinate amount of their time doing admin work. And that is taken away from their paycheck. So when you hire a salesperson, let's say the average salesperson in Vancouver is making somewhere between $50 and $75 an hour, so $100,000 to $150,000 a year. The last thing you want them doing is clerical work, which is like a $10 to $15 an hour job that you could outsource to somebody else. And yet 65% of their time is spent doing CRM updates and finding data that will support their deal cycle and all those different things. So we created this single pane of glass that's really incredibly user-friendly, that allows salespeople to just interact with it. It does the updates to the CRM and creates the contacts and pushes the tasks and all the different things that they need to have done. But at the same time, it looks at everything that they're taking in their notes and says, okay, everything in here has value. So I'm going to try to find you some value in the organization, whether it be a white paper or a case study or just talking points that will support what's happening in your deal cycle. So we call it a deal book for the salesperson.
Great. So I'm going to make a statement. I want to hear your take on it. Poor sales rather than bad product is the most common cause of startup failure. So think about that. Poor sales rather than bad product is the most common cause of startup failure. Either of you can start and then maybe talk about.
So you're the founder of Duly, so you start with this one, Kris.
I think it's evolving, to be honest. I think that I've said this a few times already, but we're in this world where product-led growth is really taking off, and I do believe that that's going to change how consumers buy product, how businesses buy product, because the users are much more involved in the buying process now. So, for like Slack, take Slack. Slack's a great example. They've done incredibly well. They got a community of product managers to fall in love with Slack, and it went viral. And so they didn't really need a sales org. What did they need? And Jane spoke with us a few minutes ago. They needed a customer success org, and I believe that customer success has a large role in not just helping to drive adoption, but helping to personalize that adoption toward an organization. So you can automate onboarding all you want, but once somebody gets in the product, they have this now what moment where it's like, okay, this product seemed like it worked really well, but how does it work really well for me in my role? And so we see a lot of focus on the concierge-like initiation into the product.
Yeah, my reaction is I don't think you can really separate the two, right? Like you can't have a product, and even if you don't think of yourself as a salesperson, but if a founder has a product, they have to go sell it. Mm-hmm. And if you're a salesperson, you got to have something to sell. So I really don't believe you can separate out those two things. You need to be successful at both.
Yeah, one more thing on that. So it was said to me really well once. If a founder can't sell the product, they should sure as hell not expect anybody else to sell it. You should be the closest and most intimate person to that product. So I think that's really important. I think that enterprise sales has stayed relatively steady throughout this whole process because it's a complex sales cycle. You have multiple buyer personas and things like that. And you need to have a different sort of acumen for that. But in sort of the SMB world, I think it's radically changed.
Great. And so this wasn't something we talked about earlier, but Kris, we had a discussion earlier. So Unbounce theoretically uses Unbounce. You use your own product, right?
Yes.
Right. Kris, you theoretically use Duly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it would be harder to sell those products if you didn't use them yourselves, and I'm just, that's a prompt, because Kris, we were discussing a past life where this was a struggle for you guys, and I'm just curious your thoughts on that, selling something that you don't use yourself, the challenges in that. And you perhaps share that anecdote if you want to.
Yeah, right. So I had a previous company that I worked at for a very long time. You can look at my LinkedIn profile and try to figure out who that is. We had a product that we sold to some of the coolest companies around the world. I've sold into the National Hockey League, Major League Baseball, you name it, like really cool brands. And we didn't use our product internally. And as a salesperson, it actually ate away at me all the time, because you have to have a lot of integrity to sell what you sell, and you have to have a lot of belief and passion in what you sell. So when your own company isn't using that product, it feels really, really hypocritical to go out and tell other people to go out and use it. We obviously at Dooley, we dog food our product every single day, spending hours and hours in it, and we see the same from our customers. But the learnings you get out of that are almost preemptive to what you expect the customer to see. You're going to discover the features way before anybody else does. So you can go in and really work closely with the engineers and the product team to improve the designs before they go big time. So I think it's super, super important.
I think there are some exceptions to that. So I'll go back to selling Parks and Recreation software. So, as a business, we weren't a Parks and Rec, or a YMCA, so we weren't using that software. But as a salesperson, I felt extremely passionate about it, because that was my background. Like I had all my jobs in it, and to actually tell somebody, oh, I'm a Parks and Rec professional, I've moved into this role. They're like, oh, okay, we thought you were in IT, and all of a sudden everything changes. So I think there are some softwares or technologies out there that as a business you can't adopt, but the passion is that, in that case, I felt like I was making life better for people because they were being more active, or we were fighting childhood diabetes and things like that.
Great. Where do you think people get most hung up in the sales cycle as a salesperson? And do you have tips for overcoming that? And I'm not a salesperson. I think there's a large contingent of sales. Who here is in sales, actually? I guess we should. So it's a good amount, yeah.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think this actually might tie into the next question as well. But I think where salespeople really get hung up is really establishing that hard evidence and being committed. So being committed to getting the list of issues that your potential customer has, and then ranking them, and then diving into those and figuring out what the hard number is. So by using your product, are they saving $20,000, $50,000? Like, what is actually that number? Because if all the evidence that you have in your conversations is soft, then you're not really creating a defendable and empowering message. And so then that gets tough when they come back and they're like, oh, well, give us a discount, right? If you haven't established that.
Totally. There's two areas where I think that people really get hung up. One is relating need to value, and making sure that people understand the needs and pains that they have and how it relates to the value of what you can deliver. And oftentimes I feel like it's because they're so focused on what they sell as opposed to what the customer does. And if you focus on what the customer does, you'll very quickly be able to understand and interpret, because they don't know what your product does totally. So you'll be able to understand how your product is going to improve their life. I think that's a really, really important lesson that I learned in my career. The other thing that I would say is, like, in terms of when things get stuck, it's usually right after the demo. People have no idea what to do after the demo, and usually that is incumbent on management and sales enablement to help figure that stuff out, right? So I get you super jazzed about the product, then what? Okay, have I dealt all my cards? Do I have anything left to keep that sales cycle going? And typically that's because you haven't found the compelling event, you don't have something that is necessary enough for them, and so building the value story over time is really, really hard.
What did you think the next question was, Jane?
About negotiation?
Oh, let's get into some practical. Do you have any very practical tips for negotiation? I mean, those can be used in any setting.
Yeah, I think the practical tips. So if I go back to what I was just saying about, not being able to establish the value and the hard evidence. So when I talk about hard evidence, it's really that value. So what's the return on investment that your customer is going to get? And when it comes to negotiation, if you have already established that earlier on in your sales process, when you get to negotiation, you can point back and go, hey, but when we talked, you're going to save $10,000, $50,000, $100,000, whatever it is for your product, and you can't pay like this fraction of a cost. So look, I'm showing you the value that you're going to get here, and then that puts you in a more position of leverage in that negotiation.
Has anybody here read The Transparency Sale? It's probably not high on your reading list yet, but you should put it higher on your reading list. So I totally subscribe to the way that Todd Capponis has written the book and sort of the things that are in it. I actually got to spend some time with him in Indianapolis, of all places, which I never in my life thought I'd be in Indianapolis, but for reasons unknown to me, I was there. Actually, reasons that are known to me. What Todd Capponis says in his book, which I really, really liked, is when you're negotiating, there are all of these things that your buyer is trying to get discounts and deals off of. Never, ever, ever give somebody a discount. Pay them in the form of a discount. And this, I listened to it, I'm like, what do you mean? It was super cool as he started to explain it. He's like, the buyer has given you all of their signals, all of the things that are important to them. What have you done to tell them what's important to you and your business, right? So, you know what? I want to stop for a second and I want to tell you what's important to me. As a business, I really value getting an annual upfront payment. That's worth something to my business. I'm willing to pay you in the form of a discount that's worth 10% to me on the value of this deal. So I'm willing to pay you in the form of a discount if you're willing to purchase with an annual upfront as opposed to a monthly contract. And equally, security or legal or whatever those other triggers are for you, I'm willing to pay you in the form of a discount to not remove the termination clause, right? All of those different things. So I actually started using it, I don't know, I learned this about 6 months ago. I started using it more in my current sales. You're always learning in sales. You should be a perpetual learner. And it works beautifully. The buyer doesn't know what's important to you, and all they know is they need to grind you down because their boss said to grind you down and procurement said to grind you down. Help them understand why that can't be and why certain things are worth what they are. And as soon as you put a value on it, they won't grind you down past that value. So yeah, that was a big one for me. I loved it.
So what was that book again?
Transparency Sale.
Transparency Sale. That's great. I'll give you guys 2 questions. You can choose which one you want to answer. So tell us about a time when you lost a sale that you were sure that you had. Or the other one is just tell us about a time where you made a sale and it was really important to you. And it was like maybe the biggest one in your life. Maybe you haven't made that one yet, but
I'll go.
It's good or bad?
Can I give you one of both?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So first off, if you are not losing deals, you are not in enough deals. I think that's a really, really important lesson because you should be losing deals. You need to find the edges of what you can sell in order to know what the comfort zone is of where you should sell. So that's, I think, really, really important. For me, I lost a deal. I had conquered Condé Nast. I had every single brand in Condé Nast, like Wired magazine, Teen Vogue magazine, Glamour, all these different mags. I didn't have Vogue. And I was chasing Vogue, and I was so cocky about it. I totally thought I had the deal because I had all the street cred, I had all the other brands lined up, and why the heck wouldn't they buy from me? I got sloppy, I got lazy, and I stopped listening to the needs of the buyer. And I didn't win that deal, and to this day, that one really bothers me. And I've lost more deals than that, I promise you. But that one really bothered me because I didn't do my job, and I deserved to lose. There are times when you deserve to lose because you didn't do your job, and I think that's really, really important. On the winning side, I worked for a pretty incredible CEO, but also a very difficult CEO at my last company. And he didn't really understand tech, but he was a really, really smart person. And so we were on a sales, we were building our funnel and all the rest of that stuff, and I was struggling to make the first deal because we didn't have any deals. We had never signed a customer outside of some nepotism deals that he had with his cronies in Canada. So, and ironically, Rich Adam, I think, who's the podcast guy from PwC, good friend of mine, he ran Canada for this last company, so really great guy. But, you know, there was a lot of pressure mounting, and I was really convinced that we were doing the right thing. And we ended up in a sales cycle with the National Hockey League. And as a Canadian company, like, come on, that's a pretty big one to land. And I don't feel like I was excited about the deal because I got to prove my CEO wrong. I felt like I was excited to win the deal because of how it illuminated the faces of everybody else in the organization and how excited people got when you walked in and you said, guess what? We're legit. We just got the National Hockey League. And everybody was like, holy shit, the National Hockey League. So like that was a really awesome, exciting win for me personally, and it led to Major League Baseball, and it led to the National Football League, and it led to UFC and all these other really cool brands. But they were like the first one, and that was awesome. And then of course, like just really quickly, the first deal you make when you're a founder at your company, when somebody says, I am willing to give you money for what you have, is like this really, really awesome moment. We still have the check framed. Actually, we have a copy of the check. We need the money really badly. We have the check framed and on the wall for the first company that signed up with us, because that was like just awesome.
Great. Jane, both or just?
Yeah, I'll do both.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about one that got away. So I'm going to go back to the Parks and Rec software, because I haven't done a lot of selling directly at Unbounce, but for me personally, we had 80% of the market share in North America. We were the leader. However, we were end-of-lifing our client server product, bringing on our hosted product, and we had got bought by an equity firm, and the culture of the company was destroyed. Like support was scaled back, service everywhere, and we were not providing the same level of service to our customers and on any front. And so they weren't liking us as much anymore. We weren't listening to them. We weren't answering their calls in a timely manner. And you know, that impacted, these customers became angry, and 10 cities in BC came together in an RFP, and we lost all of those cities to a small little competitor. And so that one hurt a lot, because these are people we worked with all the time for years. And so, you know, it just, I think, goes to the importance of treating employees well, who in turn treat customers well. And I think on the flip side, I think the most precious for me is my first deal. I can remember getting my sign quote and like skipping down the hallway and just being like, yes, this is what sales is. This feels so great. And so that kind of stands out for me. I'd say now at Unbounce, it's living that through my reps and seeing them succeed and learn new skills and see them be successful. And so every day, that's a win for me.
Great. So I have a ton more questions, but I imagine there are some questions out here. So are there any questions that I can take now, or we'll leave them until the end? Great. Perfect.
What's the most difficult deal you have
The most difficult deal?
The most difficult time of the year?
No, the negotiation, the most difficult part here is
Oh, the most difficult part in the sales cycle, I guess.
I definitely have one for this. When I moved to Australia, I was a big believer that when you're trying to open up a new market, you pick a fight with the biggest person in the market. And so I wanted to land the biggest company I possibly could in Australia, which happens to be Telstra, which is like the equivalent of TELUS or Bell. We'll say TELUS just because we're in TELUS' space. And I had a hard time getting into this buyer. He was a really, really shrewd buyer, a really difficult person to get along with even. And you're trying, like as a salesperson, one of your really important traits is actually to be a really good chameleon and adjust to the person that you're talking to. And you'll find the more deeper you're into your career, the easier you find it to adjust and adapt to different people and different personalities, which is why I like hiring people who've worked in a bar or who've worked in a restaurant, because they've already experienced a lot of that. So anyway, at Telstra, I pitched this company the vision of what we could do, and he was like, I love it, it's great. I need you to actually run the research. So this was at Vision Critical. I need to run the research on this deal as well. I'm like, well, we don't have a research department in Australia, so that's going to be impossible. So then I went and partnered with one of our partners, a company called Synovate, which was bought a few years later, and we went and repitched the deal, and he goes, I still really like you, Synovate, you're out. I'm like, oh my God, are you serious? So I had to then find another partner to try to broker the deal with, and we pitched it, and it went really, really well. And the partner, I still remember, was like a boutique market research firm. She goes, there's no way in God's green earth I'm working with that guy. We're out. I'm like, holy smokes. So I ended up having to negotiate with my CEO to fly a research division down, like start a research division in Australia in order to get this deal done. So you can start to see like this is becoming a really costly deal, but that deal to this day pays Vision Critical about $1.6 million a year, and was a pretty nice paycheck, pretty nice bounty. So I was pretty proud of like the tenacity that was involved in getting that one across the line. It was really, really complicated, lots of buyer personalities, big complicated procurement process. Lots of legal stuff. So yeah, that was mine for sure.
I think what comes to mind for me is when you have a contract that goes to legal, and lawyers start talking lawyer to each other, and you kind of, as a salesperson, you kind of lose control of that, right? Because the lawyers are going at it, and it's. Is there any lawyers in the room here? Yeah.
Lawyers suck.
You know what I'm?
Lawyers suck.
Are you agreeing? Right? Like it's not always that pleasant. So, and some lawyers are great, but sometimes I've had lawyers being like, "We're on the LA minute here," and sorry, I don't mean to say, but just those negotiations between lawyers and your lack of control. So you've gone through and you've sold the value, and you think this is going to be a great customer, and the customer thinks it's going to be great, but there's terms that the two companies can't come together on, and for whatever the reason, and then you lose the deal after all of that work, and I think that's the most difficult part of all.
Great, thanks. Grab another question. Ash in the back.
Do you have any advice for salespeople who want to move from being a salesperson to being a manager? Like, I think that's like something where when you make that decision, what kind of personality types are good for that? Because sometimes you could be a kick-ass salesperson, but you're going to probably be not a great manager.
So
it's you made the change. So maybe. Yeah.
So it's advice for going from a salesperson to a manager. And I'm just repeating it so the camera picks it up.
Okay.
You go, Ray.
Okay. Yeah, I actually have a lot of thoughts on this one. My opinion, there's not a lot of salespeople who make really good managers. And I think it's and there's some who are fantastic, like me and Kris. But I think it's like whenever I have a salesperson who asks me, I want to be a manager, I will always ask them, what makes you feel that way? What do you think you will get out of being a manager that's driving you to want to do that? Because a lot of times people just think that's the next step in the career. And that doesn't necessarily need to be the step, right? Like you can continue on in your sales career and grow through what you're selling, becoming a more strategic salesperson, and grow up the ladder that way. So I'm always really curious as to why people want to be it. So I would say if you're a salesperson and you think you want to be a manager, ask yourself why. Like you're not typically going out and selling a deal every day and getting that great feeling of closing a deal. You end up living that vicariously. That's one thing I distinctly remember about moving from an IC individual contributor role into a sales manager role, right? And you become the supporting cast. You're supporting that person and you're helping them, and you all of a sudden have this team goal. And so you have to influence the people that are now on your team to make the sale. So I'd really think about if you're thinking about that, what are the reasons why you want to make that move? I can think of one person in my mind. He's the best salesperson that I ever worked with in my career, and he went into a sales management role, and it didn't work for him. And he had the courage to actually go, you know what, I don't really like this. And he went back into an individual sales role and has continued to grow his career, is extremely, extremely successful. So I'm happy to talk with anybody about it if you want to work through that, but just I would ask yourself that question.
Wayne Gretzky was the best hockey player that ever skated, without a doubt. Maybe some would argue Mario Lemieux, but it was probably Wayne Gretzky. He was a terrible coach. He was too unrelatable to those, because he was seeing things that other people couldn't see, but he couldn't articulate it really well. So I look for people, when I'm looking for leadership, you look for people who other people want to follow and who other people want to learn from. A lot of times people see sales management or leaving SDR to go to become an AE, they see it as an off-ramp because they're burnt out. And they see going from an AE to a manager as an off-ramp. It's totally not. I think if you want to make, first of all, you want to make a lot of bank, don't become a manager, sell. You'll make way more money selling, and you can continue to level up. You don't have to stay at the same job. You can level up and find a better and better and better career. But it's not an obvious off-ramp for people to go from this to this. It's actually a completely different discipline.
Great. Maybe a couple more questions. No, we'll take them all. So start on the front here.
Yeah, I have a question about if you sell some brand new and thank you. Actually, my question is, if you sell something brand new, there's not in the market, or not too many in the market, how you break the price? What's the key skills that you have to approach the customer so they will buy your product, or understand your product first and then buy the product? Thank you.
I'll speak as a founder on this one. I think that you need to do a ton of market research before you put your product into the field, right? You really need to understand the customer and their needs and their pains and their drivers, so you build the right thing. If you build something and then test it, you're too far gone. My first advice is test the living daylights out of all your hypotheses before you actually start to sell, and then really dig into the needs. Dig into the needs, dig into the pains, and try to relate them through your product back to whoever's buying it. I don't think that there's a magic formula for it, but I would say, what do they say? It's Blank that says it. Steve Blank, who basically says, get out of the office and talk to people.
He says that there are no facts inside the building.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Jonathan?
Yeah, years ago I worked for a company that I was maybe 8 feet away from the sales guy, but there might as well have been a 2 feet thick concrete wall between us. And then years later I worked with a company where there was near perfect transparency and collaboration between sales and marketing. I was curious about your sort of your success story, or when you understood there was good synergy between sales and marketing in a company you were working with.
I think it's an evolution. I think that the timing of those two different events might have been part of the reason why that happened. Sales and marketing used to be more divided. Marketing used to be much more collateral and conferences and all that stuff, and it's not anymore. Now it's top of funnel and creating leads and helping to nurture those leads so that the salesperson gets something meaningful. But it also, the next hop in that is sales goes into customer success. You have this virtuous loop between all the different parts of the business, and CS should be feeding all the tribal knowledge back into sales so that sales becomes smarter, because nobody knows if the customer is happier better than customer success. Nobody knows the stories of the customer and the anecdotes better than customer success. And right, so those three groups need to work really, really well together in today's environment in order for you to be spectacular. I just think honestly, I just feel like it's an evolution that's happened.
Yeah, I think it's understanding how it's making sure everybody understands how they fit. So if you're in marketing, what are you doing, and how does that affect the sales team, and then the sales team, how does that affect customer success? So like Kris was saying, making sure everybody knows what they're doing and the value and understanding what the goals are and how, as a revenue unit, you're going to achieve all of that together.
Great. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we'll try and get through them. Right here up front.
Mine will be really quick. All right. I really do believe that mentorship and the individual that you report to during your sales career as you're learning makes a huge difference in your success, in sales, success of learning and moving on with your career. It has for me, at least for the past few years. Can you talk about a time during your sales career that you connected with your boss or a mentor that made a difference? It might have been in a sales process, it might have been a personal growth or a career growth, but you still remember this point, even if it was years ago or it was yesterday, or a time that you actually really grew from it and you connected with him on not just a career level, but personal level. And
I'll start, seeing as I have a microphone and you don't. Rob Riley is that person for me. He hired me into my first sales role, and I continued. He's just someone that I just connected with, and he inspired me not only as an individual salesperson, but I learned a lot of lessons from him on what I felt like good sales leadership looked like. And a lot of the things that I have in my style today are based on him. And he had this belief that he spent 80% of his time with his top reps. I was fortunate enough to be one of those people, and just to be able to get that investment of his time is so valuable. And that's like 15 years ago, and I haven't worked with him in years, and I still go out with him, and I still ask him for advice and feedback, and we have a drink and we have a laugh. And I always regret I never got to work with him again, but he's somebody that was really inspirational for me. And I just think, like you said, mentorship is so important. So I always try, and I still get mentorship throughout my career, and I always try and give back as well, and pass it on.
I'm pretty blessed because I engage with the sales community pretty much every day and talk to sales leaders. So I get loads and loads of mentorship and a lot of opinions, and opinions are sometimes good and sometimes not good. I'm going to flip it. My best mentors, let me just say this first. I'm a big believer that you never, ever, ever forget where you came from. I can promise you this, there is an SDR in your company right now that is sweating their ass off trying to get their number, and they're working really hard, and they're going home broken some days because they made 100 calls or 100 emails and they got nothing out of it, and it sucks. And it's really, really a challenging job. So I'm going to say my biggest mentors were the people that worked for me, not the people I worked for. And in some ways, I worked for them. So my two rock stars that I'm going to mention here, I'm going to mention Jenna Dorman, who was one of my SDRs at Vision Critical in the early days. And Jenna came and she showed up every single day, and she worked her ass off every single day. And you could see like her tenacity and her grit drove me, because I knew that if I failed her. She's the one that worked her ass off to get that lead in, and not doing something good with that lead was a mistake that I would have to make, and I wasn't about to make that for her because I could see how hard she worked. And the same thing, Paul Albert, another person that worked on one of my teams, he's now living in London. He's got a couple kids, and his career has completely changed, like 180 degrees from when I first met him, when he was just like this happy-go-lucky individual contributor as an SDR. He would bust his butt, and you could see the pride when he brought a lead across. You could see the pride that he brought to the table when that lead was handed over. And we used to have this like lead board where you'd update your leads all the time and show who the last lead was you brought in. And I took great inspiration from that, again, thinking if I don't do something with that lead now that he has worked so hard to bring it in, it's on me. So yeah, my best mentors are the people that worked for me.
Great, thanks. We'll do, unfortunately, we can only do, I think, 2 or 3 more, just because we're on a time limit. And we want to leave time for Kris and Jane to talk to people afterwards, so we'll do 2 or 3 more.
Cool. So I just wanted to go back to a point that you said, Jane. So, for example, our organization, similarly, we relied a lot on inbound and vendor referral leads. And we just started going into more of like the outbound sales type of initiative. So do you have any suggestions or tips on how, if at all, it is different to build an inbound versus an outbound type of initiative within the sales team itself?
Yeah, I think when you're doing inbound, when you're doing outbound, you choose who your leads are, and when you're doing inbound, you don't, right? Like you're kind of capturing that. So I think as you transition, it's making like there's a lot of things you got to account for. You have to account for that you have processes in place, right? So what's your flow with Salesforce or whatever you're using for your CRM, and making sure that your lead flow is all working, and that you're able to get like the list and a targeted list, right? So you want to have your segments down pat. You don't want to have this broad blanket of organizations that you're contacting. So you really need to know who you want to specifically be contacting and talking to, which should fall within the value that you give to your segments, and that you have the contact information you need. Because if you start spending money and you don't have those things ready and in place, then you're not going to be efficient, and you're going to be wasting some of that money. Do you have anything to add?
I think the question was asked directly to you, so no, I'm good. No, honestly, the inbound versus outbound thing, sometimes it's just the company you work for and the business model you have that's going to dictate whether one will work or the other. You can't tell a market to look for you. The market is either looking for you or they aren't, and you can try to market toward that and try to drive that inbound engine. But at the end of the day, there are certain products that some people have to push. And that's just a reality. It's either it's a new segment that nobody's even heard of, or maybe it's just it's a tricky enterprise-y sale where you really have to drive that outbound energy.
So this is a question for Jane. You had spoken earlier about the ROI and holding your sales team to kind of a hard number or a hard percentage or something like that. When you said that, I was like, wow, that's pretty intrepid. That's very brave. Because in my experience, a lot of the times when we try to do that to our customers try to hold us to that. And they would say, okay, so if you're going to save us $50,000 a quarter, we're going to hold you to that, and we're going to sue you if you don't do that. So how do you
never sign that deal?
Yeah.
I can't say I've ever had that experience. I think maybe it's the way that you're positioning, right? Because really, you want that customer to be building that ROI themselves. You're guiding them through it. So it's not you saying, I'm going to save you $50,000. You want to work with the customer to come up with that number, right? So they should be providing that number. So really, they're the ones who are stamping that number. It's not you, right? You're not working in their organization. You don't know. But if they bring their numbers to the table and go, okay, we spend this much an hour, so we're going to save this much time, and that equates to this much time over the year. Or we're going to be able to do more of these things, and so we're going to make more money. So really, you want them to own coming up with what that number is. And so maybe that would resolve that issue.
Yeah, it had probably to do more with the specific industry that we were in, and the specific kind of liabilities that we had, but that makes a lot of sense. It was more, the question was more about in the sense of coming up with hard things to do quid pro quo bargaining. And sorry about the quid pro quo people.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately with the ROI, you want to make sure there's value there, right? Because you don't want to sell something to somebody if they're not going to get any value out of it. So it gives you a really definite answer there.
Just over here.
Yeah, thanks. I believe one of the most important things is when in a deal, the kind of like mindset that you bring in, the salesperson bring in, as important as getting to know your product, your sales process, and your buyer's needs and whatever it is. So how do you coach your reps to handle that, like their mindsets, and what kind of tips do you give them?
I'm hoping I understand the question. It's around mindset in selling. I think that you really need to be passionate. This is my personal belief. I believe you need to be passionate about something in the sales process. It either has to be the buyer, the industry, or the product you're selling. And if you don't possess one of those traits, it's going to be very hard for you to make that sale unless you're just like totally coin operated, and you just see dollar bills on everybody's forehead when you go into the sale. So, and I know people like that, by the way, and they've done very well in their careers, and hats off to them. I couldn't do it. So yeah, I also think that every person's mindset is going to be different, and that's why salespeople are creatives at heart, right? Like some people will be really passionate about the product, and I can tell you, like people that I've worked with in past roles, like I don't think that Jenna, when she started her career at Vision Critical, was super passionate about the product, but she was super passionate about media, and she was super passionate about the buyer, and she totally connected with that. So that worked for her. I just think you need to figure out what their drivers are, what their motivations are, and then try to help them harness those things in their own sales process, and that's what makes them unique and special. Yeah, as an individual, absolutely. Don't treat your sales team homogeneously unless they are all literally the same personality.
And I would add to that, one thing I always look for when I hire people is, do they have a sense of belief? If you don't believe that you can win or that you're going to be successful, you're not going to be. So I'm always looking for people who believe in success.
Great. I'm so sorry, guys. Kels will kick us out of here eventually. But I want to leave time for networking. The beer's back out. Jane and Kris will probably stick around for a little bit up here to speak with you guys. So I will get the last question in, which is, what changes do you see happening in sales over the last 5 years? How can we all prepare for these changes?
Go for it.
Well, I think definitely in the next couple of years is AI. So we're seeing a lot of things like chatbots, like Drift with their sales and marketing, conversational marketing AI. I think those things are really important. I think Kris is a testament to some of the solutions with Dooley that we see as far as making salespeople more efficient. You can buy me a beer later. Oh wait, they're free.
Oh, wait, I think Ash
that guy's gonna buy me a beer.
Ash has got the beer.
So I really think that there's going to be a lot of focus on efficiency and speed to the lead. You can tell Angus, our one sales rep, that he always tells us speed to the lead, right? But it's about being efficient and getting in contact with the customers the way they want. So it's not just phone, it's email. We use a lot of texting now. We're trying that out. Kris mentioned Zoom earlier. We don't even have I don't have a phone at my desk. I think I've got Marianne and Megan here tonight, two of my sales reps, and they use soft phone, right? So I had a phone and it collected dust, literally. But I think Zoom and really harnessing that face-to-face technology and making videos and things like that are really going to be the changers for us.
I'm going to just build on what you said, because I truly believe that the further in time we move, the more of the buyer's journey is going to happen before you even have spoken to them. So I think that you're going to see more and more technology that helps you to understand buyer intent way before the current signals are helping you understand that. You see the little drips of it right now from Trust Radius and G2 Crowd and all these other things, but they're only just scratching the surface, I believe. So there's going to be a change to the way that social networks work as a result of that. There's going to be lots of things that change to help us to understand and stimulate our sales organization at the right moment based on buyer intent happening earlier and in sort of a more prepared way. You had one more question that I wanted to make sure that
sure.
answered. We cheated. We knew the questions way in before this, right?
But not the Q&A questions, right?
So this one's actually really, really personal to me, so I wanted to make sure that I said it because this is a really important month. You asked a question about do you practice sales techniques on your kids, or do you something along those lines?
It's a good question, actually.
And to me, this is a really, really, really personal story that I'm going to share with you. My eldest son turns 15 at the end of this month, and last year he was really struggling in school. This is a straight A kid. He's smart beyond smart, and I know every parent says that their kids are geniuses. My kid's a genius, just like everybody else's kids. And so he was really struggling in school, and he's like, "Dad, I don't get the point of school right now. It doesn't seem to work for what I want to get out of life." And I said, okay, I want to change that around for you right now because I don't want you to lose sight of why this is important, why this is an important mission for you, your education and bettering yourself as an individual and learning about the world and all that stuff. My dad last year, My dad last year was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. That's hard. And so when he said that to me, I said, okay, I want you to think about the one thing that I did that changed his life. I'm saying this, by the way, because this month is Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month, and my dad's surgery happened a year ago in 3 days. And he's still alive. That's awesome. So I said, when Grandpa got sick, what's the one thing that I did that made a difference to him? And it was the only thing I knew how to do. So I wrote like this total Hail Mary email to the leading surgeon. Now I can tell the story a little bit more comfortably because I got through the hard part. The leading pancreatic surgeon in Canada with regard to what my dad needed to undergo, which was a hellish surgery. And I had the perfect subject line. I knew what the subject line needed to be to catch his attention. I had the perfect opening sentence for what I needed to say to catch his attention and to draw him in. And like, if there's ever a moment in sales that was really, really important to me, it was this moment. I got a call back from this surgeon 10 minutes after I sent the email. And he said, get your dad in to see me tomorrow. And that was on October the 24th. My dad had surgery on November the 22nd, and if that email didn't go out, and if that sale didn't happen, I'd lose my dad. So I said, if you ever need to understand why school is important to you, I wrote the best email that I possibly could. It was perfect English, it was well-spoken, it was articulate, it spoke to the needs I had, it spoke to what was interesting to that surgeon, which was, we have a family history of this shitty disease. So if there's ever a reason why you need to get better and educate yourself and all the rest of those things, look no further than that moment. Thank you.
Feels like a good place to
I think that's
leave
a
off.
perfect place to wrap it up. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Kris, for your stories, your insights, and your time. And I had no doubt that you guys wouldn't disappoint, and I think this was everything we all thought and more. So thank you for being here this evening.